Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today, I'm going to talk about The Nations of Theah, Volume 1, which is a setting book for the 7th Sea 2nd Edition role playing game. I love 7th Sea very much. I gave it a rave review a month or two ago. I'm actually running a campaign for it right now. And just, it's a fantastic game with a really innovative system. I strongly encourage you to check out that earlier review if you're not familiar with it. It is set in kind of a 17th century fake magical Europe, so to speak, right? So, if you like stuff like Pirates of the Caribbean, Three Musketeers, Princess Bride, swashbuckling and sword fights and swinging from chandeliers and that kind of thing, Seventh Sea is absolutely for you. And it has a really fascinating world with a lot of detail, and I mean a lot of detail. There are enough world books that they're starting to cover most of the fake magical version of the world, right? They've got books that go down into Africa and the Middle East. They've got books about the New World to sail across the sea. They have books entirely about pirates. They're doing one right now that isn't out yet that's about their version of China. But the core book focuses on the area that's kind of sort of Europe, right? And so the first two setting books for it, Volume 1 and Volume 2, each take 4 of those 8 main nations and explore them in incredible, delicious detail. Volume 2, which we'll get to later on, has the kind of Eastern Europe. So Sarmatian Commonwealth, which is kind of like fake Poland, Usura, which is fake Russia, Eisen, which is fake Germany, and then Vodacce, which is fake Italy / Venice. Volume 1, which we're going to look at today, goes into the western part of Europe. So starting with Avalon, which is like fake England, and Ireland and Scotland. Montaigne, which is fake France, Castile, which is fake Spain, and Vestenmenevenyar, which is a combination of kind of Norway and Denmark and the Netherlands all mushed into one thing. So kind of Scandinavia, Viking area. Anyway, it's super cool. So let's take a look at Avalon first. And let's zoom in on this. I am not going to go into huge detail on what it says about each nation because there's a lot of really good information in there. I can't possibly cover it all. So instead, I'm going to, I don't want to give stuff away as well if there's game masters out there that are going to be using some of these secrets. But let's start here and talk about Avalon. And through this, you can see some of what it has. So there's a quick overview of what it's like. And Avalon, for example, is all about the rise of the she, which is this word right here. It doesn't look like it's pronounced she, but it's totally pronounced she. And that is basically the Fae, the fairy kingdom, right? And so the Avalon is comprised of Avalon itself and Innismore, which is kind of sort of Ireland, and the Highland Marches, which is kind of sort of Scotland. And the three of them work together because Queen Elaine showed up and united everyone 10 years ago. There was a huge, one of the main background elements of the Seventh Sea world is that there was a massive war that was 30 years long, and it was called the War of the Cross. And it was this huge religious thing. And it has changed the face of the land entirely. One of the things it did was it kind of sowed a lot of discord in Avalon, and everyone was kind of fighting everyone. There was a big civil war within Avalon that's kind of sort of still going on. And that war ended about 30 years ago. And then about 10 years ago, Queen Elaine showed up. And she had spent a long, long time living among the Sidhe. And when she came back, this is going to be an obnoxious word. Um, when she came back, she had the Grail, and the Grail gave her kind of the political and moral authority to proclaim herself the ruler, and everyone decided, okay, yes, we're going to follow you. And that put an end to all of the infighting and all of the civil war. But it brought the Sidhe as a political entity back. The Fae, the fairy creatures, the Sidhe, had all been living in their own lands far away, some kind of alternate dimension, Feywild kind of a thing. And now they're all coming back because Queen Elaine is bridging that gap between them. And so that is changing everything. And Avalon is a land absolutely steeped in magic, just overflowing with it. And so people are reacting in different ways to what it's like. And that's kind of the main storyline, so to speak, going on in Avalon right now, is the Sidhe are returning. Innismore and the Highland Marches kind of sort of just want to be their own thing, and they all have their own problems, and everyone's trying to deal with that. So the book gives a lot of great background on all of that. And then, it talks about the important people you get. And I love the way that this is structured, because there's a section called Important People, and then it will give their name, and then a big write-up about them, and then it will say how to portray them in your game, and then it will give some story hooks. And it does this for every NPC that it uses. And I love that it does this, especially for some of the rulers, the Queen of Avalon, the Emperor of Montaigne. This is the kind of game where your characters can and maybe should interact with these very big, important people. It's a larger-than-life, big adventure story with a lot of interesting political subtext if you want to use it. And so we have all of this. So, we get Duchess Colleen MacLeod, who's from the Highland Marches, sort of, and helps Queen Elaine and is her main friend and trusted advisor and girlfriend. We have their version of Merlin here. And like I said, there's always the description of who they are, which is just filled with story seeds, and then how to portray them in game, and some story hooks to incorporate them into your game. And this goes on and on. There's so much here. The leader of Innismore, the leader of the Highland Marches. Then we get to the Realists. The Realists is a group that are opposing the Sidhe. They don't like magic. Some of them straight up don't believe in magic, which is ridiculous given that it's everywhere and there's like centaurs running around. But, okay, so, in fact, there's a centaur. So then there's a whole section on the goodly folk, the Sidhe, what they're doing, what they want, how to gain favor with them. And then, of course, every section has, when it talks about each nation, it goes into detail on how each of the secret societies, because there's a bunch, and they operate all over the place. So, like, Die Kreuzritter is everywhere. It's an Eisen group, but how do they operate in Avalon? What do they do in Avalon? What does Avalon think about them? You get that for all of the secret societies. Boom, 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 boom. Then there is this fantastic section that goes into places with wonderful information. This looks like just giant walls of text, but it's all really well written, and it has a lot of great story info. And the one that I want to point out to you in particular is actually in Montaigne, so we're going to skip through all of this. Anyway, look at all this wonderful stuff. Now, let's talk about sorcery. Every nation in 7th Sea has its own version of sorcery and its own version of magic. And in Avalon, that is called glamour, and that is basically a connection to a Grail Knight, and that you bear that knight's mantle, and that grants you some powers. Okay? That's all described in the main book, but there's extra stuff in this one. One of the things that I really love is how you can kind of push that connection farther than it's supposed to, and the Sidhe will grant you extra powers, but at the cost of gaining a debt to the Sidhe. And nobody wants to be in debt to the goodly folk of the fairy world, right? That's never a great thing. And so there's a lot of curses that can pop up. And then there's this great system called embodiment, which lets someone who uses this Avalon magic come to fully embody the particular Grail Knight that they are mimicking, and then you gain access to this legendary glamour that you wouldn't otherwise get. So it's like an ultimate power, or it's a really nice story thing that over the course of an entire campaign you can earn the right to use this legendary power. And that's kind of a hallmark for everything in this series, and especially in these books, is that there's new information, but that information comes with story opportunities seeded all through it. It's not just here's a new power you can use, but here's a personal quest you can go on in order to gain new powers. And there's a lot of player flexibility in that and a lot of choice. It's just really a wonderfully designed system and book. Every nation has its own versions of dueling and its own specialties, and it talks about those in detail here. Then it talks about legends, because this is a land of magic and a land of deep history and tradition, and so each land has their own legends, and these again are just wonderful story ideas that you can use. Now, next up is Castile. Castile is very different than Avalon because it was kind of the epicenter for a lot of the War of the Cross. And so whereas they used to be one of the richest and most powerful nations, today they are bankrupt. A lot of people are destitute. The war devastated them in a way that it didn't devastate everyone else. It hurt everybody. It obliterated Castile. And a lot of that is because of the Inquisition. One of the analogs to our world is that there is a Catholic church and a Protestant church, called here the Vatican Church and the Objectionists. And the Vatican Church is kind of what started the War of the Cross in the first place. And in the process of that, an Inquisition arose. And the High Inquisitor kind of was actively sabotaging Castile's war efforts in order to gain more power. And so today, the Inquisition and the Church, but mostly the Inquisition, rules Castile with an iron fist. And all the people who went off to war came home to nothing because they lost their lands, or they didn't get paid, or their families were all scattered or killed. And so it's a land that is still steeped in tradition. It's their most important thing. In fact, that's what this little epigram here at the front says, and I actually really love this as a two-sentence description of what Castile is like. It says, "Castilians are stubborn. You can't get them to do anything they don't want to do unless you tell them it's a tradition. Tradition can make a Castilian dance on the back of a horse, fight to the death because of a slight to her sister, or give up her neighbor to the Inquisition." And that really tells you everything you need to know about Castile. They have this incredibly proud heritage. They consider themselves noble, even though the reality doesn't bear that out much anymore. They've lost their lands, they've lost their homes and families, but they're still very proud of what they used to have. And if they can hang on to those traditions and the ideas of the way the world used to be, it can help them pretend that the world is still that way. And so one of the things that I love in here, it goes a lot into the history of the War of the Cross and talks about the traditions they have. And then it talks about the king. And this is something you absolutely have to read, and I'm not going to talk about it. But the King of Castile is currently being held prisoner by the Inquisition. But in a way, again, that is an absolutely incredible story hook. And a wonderful thing you can seed into your game and use. And I'm not going to spoil anything in case there's any game masters out there that want to do it. I want to use it as a campaign hook or something. So it goes into all this different stuff, and it talks about the Cardinal Esteban Verdugo, who's the head of the Inquisition. There's so much in here that's wonderful. Let's skip ahead because I've already shown you the structure of what each nation looks like. And so now I'm just kind of showing you some highlights. So let's go to Montaigne. Montaigne is France. It is ruled by the Emperor of the world, he calls himself. And they have kind of left the Vatican Church entirely. And so Castile and Montaigne hate each other. But one of the really great locations here in Montaigne, if I can find it, is the Loch Forest. This is kind of, here it is. So the Loch Forest is up in the north part of Montaigne, which puts it very close to Eisen, and it puts it very close to the water that lead, the channel that leads across to Avalon. And over the years, as the politics have moved the border back and forth, this has belonged to all of those nations in different times and for different reasons. And what's interesting about it is that it is a full-blown enchanted forest. It has a lot of kind of vaguely Arthurian legend in it, has a lot of French fairy tale mixed into it. It has a lot of really fascinating stuff. I like to mention this because the campaign that I am running, they're in the Loch Forest right now, and there's so many great options of different types of fey folk for them to run across, and bandits and kings and legends and all sorts of things that are happening there, and it's just really full of good stuff. Now, every nation, like I said, has their own sorcery. And for Montaigne, that is called porte, which is kind of a teleporting, you can open portals and walk through, and it's more than just teleporting. I sound like a broken record at this point, but this game tries very hard to insert lots of interesting story elements into everything. So it's not just a way of traveling really fast. It is a way of traveling really fast that creates cool stories. So you actually are kind of ripping holes in the fabric of the universe and walking through some kind of dark, weird other world in order to get where you're going. And it's still super fast compared to normal travel, but it's dangerous. It's almost like going through the warp in a Warhammer 40K kind of sense. Anyway, the core book describes it and talks about it. This book, Nations of Theah, Volume 1, goes into so much more detail about how that works, how the magic works, how the portals work, what is it like to walk through it, what is it like if you get lost in it, how do you get back out again if you become trapped in that other world. There are different powers that you can gain, alternate powers. There's redemption arcs of how to regain your sanity if you lose too much because you got trapped in there. There's so many story opportunities, and it's really just wonderful. Let's take a quick look then at the last of the nations in this book, Vestin Menevenyar, which is the kind of Scandinavian one. What they've done is they've not just combined all of the different kind of Nordic countries together, but they have really combined them ideologically. Take the old style Vikings and then kind of the Age of Sail Denmark, the Danish fleets, or I should say the Dutch fleets, were one of the most powerful in the entire world. And so what they've done here is they've combined those two things. That Vestin is a nation that's very far north, it's very icy and snowy. They have historically relied on Vikings and piracy and that sort of thing, pillages and raids, but then at some point they figured out how to become an economic powerhouse. And so today they are run by something called the Vendo League, which is essentially a merchant's guild. And it is an entirely economic-based country. It has this history of piracy that they are trying to put behind themselves and become this very peaceful, economically powerful banking merchant nation. And the tension between those two, between a history of, savagery and these modern ideals of peace and prosperity, and how can they justify those, and how can they maintain those, and how can they become who they want to be without forgetting who they used to be, and things like that. It's a really interesting nation. Now, one other thing they've done in this book in particular, Vestin didn't really have a magic system in the core book, but they do have one here, and it's called Galder, which is basically a runic thing. If you've heard the word Futhark before, where the Futhark. That's actually a real word that refers to Nordic runes. It's what a lot of the dwarf runes in Lord of the Rings were based on, was the Futhark. And so they've taken that and turned it into a really interesting magic system for Vestin in the 7th Sea universe. So there's a lot of neat stuff you can do with this. Some of the powers feel completely broken, but that again is because you're trying to tell a story. And the main story here of Galder and the Futhark is that you are incurring fate, like almost kind of a karmic debt, every time you use these powers. And so there will inevitably be balance. Things will come back to haunt you if you overuse the powers, if you use them recklessly or carelessly, because there will always be a balancing factor. And so some of the powers can seem overpowered, but that's because you have to remember at some point the pendulum is going to swing back the other way. Now, one thing I didn't talk about with Castile, Castile also didn't really get a magic system in the core book. And they do have one here, sort of. Basically, it is alchemy. And they don't have a full-blown magic system because they have the Vatican Church, which opposes magic very strongly. They have the Inquisition that is actively hunting down sorcerers and trying to get rid of all of that stuff. But they do have alchemy in a sort of scientific version of magic and how to create potions and things that you can do. And it's really nice to have this book, even if only so you can use some of these cool things and gain access to a lot of this. So it really, at this point, I do think I'm just saying the same things over and over again, which is basically, this is a great book and you should buy it. And that's true. This is a great book and you should buy it. 7th Sea is a wonderful campaign system. It's a wonderful game. It has a really fascinating world, and these Nations of Theah books delve really deep into that world while giving you so many story hooks and ideas and things that can spin off into adventures or entire campaigns. If you want to work very closely with the trapped King of Castile, if you want to try to bring justice to Montaigne and the very overbearing emperor and nobles that run that country and step on the poor, if you want to try to find that peace in between the two sides of Vestin of Enyar, or if you want to help navigate all the tricky infighting and civil war of Avalon with its 3 nations and the She as a 4th nation, all trying to live together in peace while also trying to be as independent as they can. There's so much here, and it's really great. So, I encourage you all to pick this game up. 7th Sea is great, and please let me know if you love it as much as I do, because I think that you will. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. I want to make sure to also say, like I said, I am running a campaign of 7th Sea right now, and I can run campaigns for you if you want. I am a professional GM in addition to being an author and a reviewer, and so if you are interested in having me run a game for you or your friends, or if you want to maybe try to join one of the games I already have going on, I'll put a link into the comments of this thing, into the information below the video, and hit me up, shoot me an email, and we can do it. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you on my next review.